Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. With good. Ellen White had 2 sons who reached adulthood. She had 2 sons that didn't. I don't know whether Edson was the firstborn or whether he was the secondborn, but he was a problem. I kind of think that Edson was secondborn, but I don't remember for sure. But he was a problem. He was a real heartache to his mother. And she never gave up on him. She wouldn't dare. And I think there was even a period of time as he was reaching into adulthood that he was sort of on the outskirts of being with the Lord even. And she wrote him many letters. He married. They never had any children. And she wrote him a letter because he was kind of like Peter. And he was easily offended. And he saw things that were going on, and he would just react and react in ways that were best not to react. And here is part of what she wrote to him. We are forming characters for heaven. No character can be complete without trial and suffering. We must be tested. We've got to be tried. Christ bore listen carefully to this sentence. Christ bore the test of character in our behalf, that we might bear this test in our own behalf through, don't miss that, through the divine strength he has brought to us. Christ is our example in patience, in forbearance, in meekness and lowliness of mind. He was at variance, at war with the whole ungodly world. Yet he did not give way to passion and violence manifested in words or actions. Although receiving shameful abuse in return for good works. He was afflicted, he was rejected, and despitefully treated, yet he didn't retaliate. He possessed, get this, he possessed self-control. Going a step higher, he possessed dignity. Going still higher, he possessed majesty in everything he did. He suffered with calmness, and for abuse gave only compassion, pity, and love. Now, we saw this all in Sabbath school. Imitate your Redeemer in these things. Do not get excited when things go wrong. Do not let self arise and lose your self-control because you fancy things are not just as they should be. Because others are wrong is no excuse for you to do wrong. 2 wrongs never make a right. You have victories to gain in order to overcome as Christ overcame. Now she launches into a description of Jesus Christ, which is awesome. It's also very humiliating. Jesus never murmured. Never uttered. What does utter mean? Speak. Jesus never uttered discontent, displeasure, or resentment. Never did. Why did it never find expression? Because he didn't allow such thoughts to remain. He dismissed them as soon as they came. Threw them out. He was never disheartened. He was never discouraged. He was never ruffled, and he never fretted. We could say he was not ruffleable, if I could invent such a word. He was patient, calm, and self-possessed under the most exciting and trying circumstances. All his works were performed with a quiet dignity. I don't want you to miss these words. All his works were performed with a quiet dignity and ease, whatever was happening around him. Applause did not elate him, and he did not fear the threats of his enemies. He knew who he was. He knew he was the Son of God. And no threat could cause him any fear, because he knew he was connected. He had gotten connected that morning. He knew he was filled with the Holy Spirit. He knew he was submitted to the Father. He knew that the Father would take care of this in his Father's own way through him. He trusted his Father implicitly. He moved amid the world of excitement, of violence, of crime, as the sun moves above the clouds. Human passions and commotions and trials were beneath him. Can you see his dignity? Always dignified in everything he did. He sailed like the sun above them all, yet he was not indifferent to the woes of men. His heart was always touched with what? Our sufferings, our problems, our necessities, the necessities of his brethren, as though he himself were the one afflicted. He felt what his associates, were feeling. He feels now what we feel. He had a calm inward joy, a peace that was serene. His will was ever swallowed up in the will of his Father. Not my will, but yours be done. And then she looks forward to Gethsemane. Was heard from his pale, quivering lips. This is the example that God puts before us. And we read here, if I can turn right back to it, we read here, Christ is our example in patience, in forbearance, in meekness, and lowliness of mind. Christ bore the test. All these tests he bore. Why? So he can give it to us as we face our trials, our hardships, our afflictions, all of our necessities, so that we can submit those things to him, and who will live in us as we let him? Say it. Yeah. And how will he live it? Just as we read it. We are to walk and always have dignity, even majesty. Because who are we? Say it loudly. We are sons and daughters of God. Now, during Sabbath school class, we saw Peter. We didn't come to the point where Jesus, in the upper room, just hours before all that Jesus went through, Jesus said to Peter, when you are converted, strengthen your brothers. He was converted that night. He was converted. And everybody saw the difference. Everybody saw the difference. The title of the sermon is, what is it? You never know what's in a kid. You must never underestimate what's in these kids. It was just Monday morning for us. It was Monday evening in Kenya. And John gets a telephone call, and it's Grace. Now, Grace is the children's officer for Embu County, and she had told John that she would be bringing with her 5 government officials sometime, and they were going to investigate the orphanage to see whether it was ready for registration, and these people would look through everything and they would make a recommendation to the government as to whether they could be a recognized, registered orphanage in Kenya. And she calls up and she says, we'll be there tomorrow. Tomorrow. And he's thinking to himself, Grace, why couldn't you have called me a week ago? Why couldn't? That was his reaction on the inside. But he told me, he says, Grace always does this to me. Grace is a lovely person. She was an orphan. And she went through horrible experiences and determined she was going to become a children's officer to help kids that were facing what she had to face. She did say before she hung up, she said 2 things. She said, please, could you send me the 6,000 shillings? You can send them. In Kenya, we can send money by phone. She said, could you send those 6,000 shillings? Now, 6,000 shillings is really only $60 our money. But that's how much John makes in a whole month. And we don't just keep 6,000 shillings around the house because we don't have it in Kenya. It's more like $600. And John just said, Grace, the bank's already closed. I don't keep money like that here. You'll have to wait till tomorrow morning when I can go uptown, get the money. Now, there's 6,000 shillings. Each one that comes to investigate has to be paid 1,000 shillings to defray gas expenses, food expenses, and whatnot. It's just what has to be done. John told me, he said, I didn't know why. I had the impression that I should put money in the shillings account when the dollars came through, and he'd changed them into shillings. He said, I put money in the bank, and all of a sudden I realized God knew what was going to happen. God didn't leave me unprepared. And so he went and got the money, and it was ready for them when they came. She also told him, we're going to go to Tenri Orphanage. Tenri is a large Japanese investment in Kenya. They built a big hospital. They have clinics. They have a dental clinic, a really good dental clinic. They have prenatal care clinics. And they have just built an orphanage, Japanese style, impressive buildings, all kinds of kind of luxurious, and it's very impressive. She said, we're going to see the Tenri Orphanage first. We'll be there in the morning. We'll come in the afternoon. And John called Sara, his mother, Christine, his wife, Nick, his associate, and Martin, our worker. And he said, we didn't get any warning. God knew all about this, and it's not for us to be afraid. We're caught off guard. We weren't expecting this, but we needn't be fearful. God has everything under control. Just keep it under his control. And so they came, and we have 2 large homes. One home they both have 4 bedrooms. And as they came into the buildings first, and they had their clipboards. And John said they had 101 questions, and Christine said no, it was 1,000,001 questions they had. They were just firing them. One was the Minister of Education, one was the Minister of Building and Construction, one was the Minister of Agriculture, one was the Minister of Finance. I don't remember what the 5th one was, and then Grace is the children's officer. And they all had their questionnaires, and they're asking these questions, and they're writing down all these answers. And it was just one question right after another. And they, all of a sudden, I guess it was the safety, the 5th one was safety control, officer for safety. And she looked at the floor and she said, notice these tiles. Notice how they're not slick like we saw it down at Tenri. She said, these people have concern for the protection of the children. And there had been other comments of a similar nature. One gal said, notice how much cupboard space these children each have individually. And they were commenting on the spaciousness of the rooms, and the color of the walls was relaxing. And they kept coming up with, someone had a thought about the well-being of the children when these things were being built. And then they went to the outside, and John was showing them the brick machine that they had. They make the bricks manually. There's a big thing that you put the mud in, the dirt mixed with some concrete, and you put it in, and you pull down on this lever, and I can't do it. And they made these bricks out of which they made these buildings. And the Minister of Construction said, these buildings are well made. He was very impressed. And he was very impressed that they had made the bricks themselves. Now I have to tell you, as these buildings were going up, John was 19 3 years ago when he got the call. He was just about to turn 20 in a few weeks. He knew nothing about construction. We didn't know how to build houses, but God had said, go forward. The Sabbath after he and his wife each individually had received their call from the Lord to establish an orphanage, And then they talked about it and found out that each one had been called. They decided they'd better visit an orphanage. So on Sabbath afternoon, they went down to visit an orphanage. And they toured the orphanage. And they were out looking at the plot of ground. They had a bunch of rocks in it. And John was telling the owner of this orphanage what she could do with this, the greens that she could raise to feed these kids some greens. And he was giving a lot of advice because his heart is in agriculture. In Kenya, you can major in different areas in high school. And he had majored in agriculture. And all of a sudden, she said to him, "Would you and your wife come into my office? I want to talk to you." And so they went into her office, and she said, something strange happened. She says, "Last Sunday, I had a dream. And I didn't really think about it until you were out there telling me about that plot of land. I saw you. You were telling me that in my dream. And all of a sudden I recognized you, and I remembered that in my dream I had noticed that your wife was not a Kenyan. I couldn't tell exactly where she'd come from, but I suspected she was an African American. And his wife is an African American, having gone to Kenya when she was 14 years old as an orphan and lived in an orphanage in Kenya." That's a whole story. And she said, "I had a call to establish an orphanage from God." And she said, "I kept putting it off, and I kept putting it off." And God, she's a Catholic. And she said, "I kept running away from the Lord. I kept not doing it." She says, "If God's called you to establish an orphanage, don't run away. Do it, and do it now." She says, "Don't wait for money to come in. Do it, and do it now." She gave a lot of other advice, too. John and Christine, all of us, we as a household, at that particular moment, we had 15 shillings. That's 15 cents. And John's decision was already made. When John makes a decision, he makes it fast, and he only knows two speeds. One's lying flat on the bed, and the other is full speed ahead. When he came to me at 19 years old, I had no idea of the potential that kid had. I just saw a bright face, sparkling eyes, and full speed ahead, and always happy. The story that Mary read about Paul this morning in Sabbath school, as I listened to that story, I thought to myself, fact after fact that happened to that kid is what happened to John. He came to me a mess. He came actually when he was 18. He ran away from home 5 times. We thought he'd never come back. Every time he came back, and he said, "I couldn't stay away. Guka loves me. I'm Guka." That's grandfather. He couldn't stay away from the love that he found in our home. I had no idea the impact it was making. But I could see back then, every time he came home, he would say, "I couldn't stay away." Love is the most powerful power in the universe. As we were faced with making an orphanage, because as soon as they got, I was away giving camp meeting lectures when they got their call. And so he called me Saturday night when I had finished. And he told me all about going to the orphanage and what the Catholic lady had told him. And we started. I knew that I had to support them wholeheartedly with everything I had, everything we had, and we did. We had had no experience in running an orphanage. Immediately, within days, we had 4 orphans, and they were 3 orphans were teenagers. And one of those orphans was pregnant. She was pregnant in the orphanage that they had visited that Sabbath afternoon. And we learned quickly, after 6 months, we realized you do not take teenage orphans if you don't have special training. And none of us had that special training. And so we changed plans 3 through 6. That's what we're geared for. But we'd never built buildings. We'd never done all of this. But every time John would say, what do we do now? We got on our knees. We were on our knees almost more time than we were up doing anything else. And we learned together, John and I, Nick and I, that whatever comes up, we pray. We pray. And you know, I really miss John. We were just always on our knees. And now I see, as he took these 6 people through the orphanage, they went from the houses. He showed them the sewing machine a sawdust sewing machine. They got it all fixed and got it so it's not just treadle, but now it has an electric motor. And the reason they got it all fixed up was she had training in being a seamstress. And Jokey, I think I told you about the girl that was sold for a loaf of bread, a kilo of sugar, and a liter of milk or something. I don't remember exactly. And she was sold to be I think the guy was 55 or 60 years old. She was sold to him to be his I don't know how manyth wife. He now is in prison. Her parents are in prison. And that's why Grace came to us and she says, please, this girl's never seen the inside of a schoolroom. She has no idea what A, B, C is. She doesn't know 1, 2, 3 from anything. Would you take this 12-year-old girl that's just about to turn 13? Well, now she's just about ready to turn 14. And they have taken this girl and they gave her recently a plot of land. They said, this is your special project, because she liked to be out in the garden working. Whenever we would be out in the field harvesting, whatever, she wanted to be there. And yes, she sweat like all the rest of us. She had never done this before. It had never been required of her at her home. But she loved it. And so they gave her this plot of land. And they said, we want you to raise greens because we need greens. We eat them every day. And they said, we will buy from you the greens that you raise. And so it became a project. She was learning mathematics. She was learning how to write things down. She'd never written before in her life. She's learning how to write all these things down, learning how to spell, all these essentials. And so when these 6 people see this plot of land, and John explains what they're doing, how Christine's the teacher, and all. They've already seen the brick machine. They've already seen the sewing machine. They already know, because John told me on a previous telephone call, he said, if I couldn't talk, I'd die. And if I have to talk, I'd rather die. So we make a good team. Anyway, so he's telling them all about how we deal and the projects and everything that's involved. And the minister of education, after she saw that plot of land, realizing that Njoki is just about to turn 14, she'll never have the chance to go through high school because she won't get out of the orphanage until she's 18. And 18, who wants to go back and start freshman year? She said, John, I want you to contact me as soon as she's ready to leave the orphanage, because I am in charge of adult education, and I will make sure that she gets into college level adult education and whatever else she needs. John is determined to establish a school, not according to Kenyan standards that you must teach evolution and other subjects that we as Christians cannot. But Christian schools in Kenya teach all these things because it's required. John says Muslims don't have to do it. Muslims have their own curriculum. They have their own schools. Why can't we have our own schools? Why can't we teach what God tells us to teach and refrain from teaching what we're not supposed to? Why teach lies? Just teach them the truth. And already the minister of education, God has brought her there. And she has already said she doesn't need high school education. What you are giving her is what she needs. And I will make sure she gets into adult education. And so, to make a long story short, there's a lot more details involved in it. He talked to me for an hour and 15 minutes. And then Christine called me on her phone because his phone had run out of time. And she talked to me for 45. So 2 hours incomplete. I could see that God had caused John to think of all kinds of things that needed to be thought of and planned out before those people ever came. He had their answers just like that because he had already just purchased 3 acres of land and he's told them frankly, he said, this is the Lord's property. He said, we are not here to get rich. We are here to provide a home of love for these children. We do not want to be dependent on donations. And so they asked, what is your monthly income as far as from external sources, donations? And he could say, about $1,500 a month. And they said, that's good. But he says, we don't want to be dependent on that. We want to have an institution that is paying for itself through agriculture. And they could look at the maize, the corn that's growing there with big, round, thick stems, green leaves, and at the neighbors that have little stems and yellowing leaves, planted at the same time. They put fertilizer on theirs, commercial fertilizer. John does not use commercial fertilizer. He uses what God has instructed him to use. And he has healthy produce everywhere. And then when he says, and we, as soon as we're able, he showed them the places we want to build greenhouses here because we need things. We want to plant tomatoes in these greenhouses because when tomatoes are out of season, we can get a lot of money if we can grow them out of season. And we want these greenhouses. And the Minister of Agriculture could say, yeah, I can see you know what you're talking about, and I can see that's what you'll do. They had just purchased 3 acres to raise produce, to bring an income so they could buy the foods that they can't grow. He has it all figured out, and he could give them the figures just like that. What managerial ability this kid had, and I couldn't see it when he came to us. He was just a kid. But what love will do. And we need to realize that love for each one of us personally, each morning. I have a piece of paper. It's about this, well, it's really this size, and it's just written here. And it was something that John and Christine and Bonnie and I can't remember whether Nick was there or not. My dad, I think, was there. we sat down one time for Sabbath school, and we were discussing God's love and what God's love was like. And we just kind of made a sentence: God's unconditional, unselfish, unchanging, eternal love is. And we thought of all of the adjectives that we could think of what it was like, and what was appealing to us about it. The adjectives that were appealing to us. And the more we wrote, the more excited we got. This was how he loves each one of us personally. Remember Paul's story that Mary read to us about. This is John. This is what he went through as a kid. And he needed this view of how God loved him. Christine, what she went through is I can't even tell you how bad it was. She's a beautiful girl, and she was in foster homes, and she says, I hate being beautiful. She faced it all the time. She went through all of this, and she just held on to this, and she kept saying, and this, she would add this word and that word and that word of what God's love was like. And we kind of got the practice of taking that sheet of paper and putting it in front of us every morning as we get up. This is how I am loved. I am loved in this way. This is how he feels about me. This is how he looks at me. And you look at that for a while, and pretty soon, you can't be discouraged anymore. You can't. And we saw, John and I, as we were talking, as he was talking and I was listening, we saw that God had all the major questions, all the major issues that came up from these 6 people. God had already planned it out, fixed everything, so that when they came unexpectedly, it's all there. It's all in place. And there was nothing to be afraid of. And as I read this morning, I thought to myself, I can see in John, I can see in Nick, I can see in Christine, I can see in Sarah, I can see that God is doing this because this is what they're looking at. They're looking at Jesus Christ. And the reflection is awesome. Is awesome. Because they have calluses on their knees. They're there. They spend a lot of time there. John tells me, he'll call and he say, the Lord got me up at 3:30 this morning. The Lord woke me up at 4 o'clock or 2:30. He said, I had a wonderful time. He's only 23. She's only 22. They're just still kids. Don't ever underestimate what's in a kid. And don't underestimate what God can do through you and me. Our closing hymn is about love in the home, 652.
Please stand and sing hymn number 652.
Softly, sweetly,
brighter beams the azure sky. Oh, there's one who smiles on high when there's love at home. Love at home. Love at home. Time does softly, sweetly glide when there's love at home. Jesus, make me wholly yours. Then there's love at home. May your sacrifice be mine, and then there's love at home. Safely from all harm I'll rest, with no sinful care, distress. Through your tender mercy blessed, when there's love at home. Love at home. Love at home. Time does softly, sweetly glide when there's love at home. Maybe there wasn't that kind of love in your home. Maybe you didn't grow up in that kind of a situation. That's why I ended with what I ended with. We need to look at God's love for us every day, because we didn't have that exposure as children. And we've grown up with problems that many of them we may not even recognize. But these all have to be taken care of as we look and take in, absorb that love that is coming from Him, because that's the way He loves us. The yearnings that we have in our hearts, He is there to, what's the word I want? Satisfy. That's the word I want. Satisfy. He wants to satisfy our longings for love and affection, acceptance, approval. He accepts us just the way we are. Amen. He doesn't leave us that way. Praise God. Amen. But He accepts us. We are accepted in the Beloved. Let's bow our heads. And Father, to think that everything that we see in Jesus is only a revelation of You. It's a revelation of Your love. You are our Father who dotes on His children. We are the apple of Your eye. We need to remember this every day, because the devil doesn't want us to know that. He doesn't want us to remember that. He doesn't want us to walk with dignity because we know who we are. He wants us to slouch around because we think we're children of the devil. But Father, thank You that You've saved us from slavery. You've saved us from His grasp. And You have put our feet on the rock. You've put us in wide spaces. And You love us beyond all computation and comprehension. Father, as we face this new week, please help each one of us to spend time looking at Your love for us individually, and then to realize that that's the way You love everybody else, and so that we will also treat everybody else like according to the value and the worth that You have placed upon them. Thank You. Thank You. We praise You because of Your total praiseworthiness.